Welcome back to What Makes You Tick. I'm Stephen Bradshaw, and the reason I created this podcast is to help you find inspiration from the stories and experiences of others. What Makes You Tick is a vehicle for people to share their life's knowledge, their passions, and experiences with you. I get energy and inspiration from talking to people, and my goal through this platform is to help you learn from others and use this knowledge to inform your lives.
You're running the show ultimately as a single parent, even though you know that I always feel there's a deadline, a timeline. It's only for a certain amount of time, but it can be fairly full on. As anyone who's a parent knows, that it's the day in, day out. It's the breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, rinse and repeat. Can be tedious when you're on your own, and can be tough going. And I don't think that that's something you could ever get used to.
My guest today is Sarah Cahill. Sarah is a mum of two amazing girls, Lucy and Ellen, and married to Brian, a fantastic person who works in the Irish Army. Sarah epitomizes the phrase entrepreneurial spirit. Having qualified as a special needs assistant, Sarah took time out to focus on her family and raise the two girls. In doing so, Sarah found a love for play, for fun, and watching the girls made this evident through their actions and mindset. It was from there Sarah created a primal food company called Eat Like Apes. She then went on to create another company called Play Like Apes, which introduces yoga and movement to kids at a young age. Through the influence of her kids and her desire to try new things, Sarah decided to write a children's book, Elsie's Arabian Adventure. It's here we talk about anxiety in young kids, the fact that they worry quite a bit, and how we should ensure we acknowledge their feelings so they don't linger. In part 1, we set the scene with Sarah's family and background and where her inquisitive mind came from. This episode shines a light on giving life your best shot, regardless of the situation you're in. If you at least try, you'll potentially open up doors in your life that may not have been possible before. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode in What Makes You Tick. Today, I'm very, very happy to share a story with you of somebody who has been massively inspiring to me throughout my life. And as I said to people who've listened in the past, that this podcast is all about people who inspire me in different ways, in different facets of my life. And I'm delighted to welcome my cousin, Sarah, onto the podcast. Sarah, great to have you.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. My pleasure to be here.
It's the reason I wanted to bring you on, Sarah, was a couple of reasons, right? So you and I have become, like, as cousins, we've been really, really close in terms of friendship, and we've always been there for each other at different stages, especially after when your gran passed away years ago. That's when we really ignited our friendship, right? And since then, lots of things have happened in our lives, and we've been there for each other at different stages, which is brilliant. But aside from that, one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to bring you onto the podcast is that you're a mother of two kids, two gorgeous, gorgeous kids. I'm lucky enough to be godfather of one of them, which is fantastic,
Yeah.
Lucy. But I might as well be kind of godfather as well of Ellen, we'll say nothing. But anyway, so you're a mother of two kids, but you're not only that, you're an entrepreneur, you're a teacher, you're a yoga teacher, you're an author. You do so much, and you're always constantly learning, and you're constantly growing, and you're constantly trying to find a way to kind of improve your, I suppose, to challenge yourself in different ways, but also then to kind of enjoy life and make the most of life and make it as best as you can. And that for me is massively inspiring. And that for me is kind of one of the reasons why I went down and created this podcast, is because people like you in my life who are doing things and putting themselves out there, What Makes You Tick was an opportunity for me to do the same. And it's been great. So first of all, brilliant to have you on. How is everything going? Would that be a fair summation of what you do? There may be other things.
Yeah, there's been other bits as well along the way. But yeah, that sounds about right. Absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head there.
So why don't we talk about family? Because obviously we're family. But why don't we talk about family in terms of your own? Because I suppose that would be kind of like anybody's kind of foundation when it comes to life, and the way you kind of start off is that your kind of background and that growing up in a family that is based in Kildare and very much ingrained within the Irish Army, would
Yeah.
be interesting to see and hear what it was like growing up and what kind of things you took from those kind of formidable times in your life to help you to where you are today.
Oh gosh, well, I suppose, yeah, army brat, and now an army wife. Yeah, we grew up in Kildare. Both mum and dad were Limerick, and moved in their early 20s, and set up camp here, I suppose, as such, because dad was stationed in the Curragh. And I mean, yeah, I suppose my whole life revolved around barracks and in and out to the Curragh. All different facets of life, really, I suppose. But yeah, that obviously was an influential part of my growing up.
Yeah, because I had John, your dad, on the podcast at the start. I think he was episode 4 or 5. But John spoke to me about his time in the Lebanon, and obviously time starting off in the army as well, and moving into the UN and stuff. But I think it's interesting for me that when people, now that you say you're an army wife, but obviously throughout being in the army, there's times where John spoke to me about going on tour and having to travel, and
Yeah,
back in the times when he was doing it in the 70s and 80s and stuff, is that you didn't have social media, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have the connection that we have today through the likes of Zoom, FaceTime, and all that stuff. So you literally had to kind of put down pen to paper and send off your letters to your loved ones, right? What was that like for you as a kid, seeing that with your dad heading off?
um, I suppose it's funny, really. My memory, I've no, I don't overly remember in a big kind of dad's going away and it was a big deal, or anything like that. And it wasn't that he went so often, it was normal. It wasn't like that. He would go for 6 months at a time, and he would come home after 3 months, or there was a bit of leave in there in the middle, and then he would come home again and back to work. And then a year or two could pass before he might go again. So, but I never remember. I remember he was gone for some bigger occasions. I know he was gone for my confirmation. I remember that because we moved house around the same time as well, and I suppose that memory just all stands out.
Yeah.
But I suppose that was down to mum, really, as well. Nothing was ever uh, a big deal. It was, we just, it was what it was. And he was gone, and she used to, have photos of him beside my bed, and and we would write to him regularly. I remember the old envelopes. The letter was the envelope, and you'd write it up, and
Yeah.
uh, write it up and then seal it up, and then post it, kind of airmail envelopes back in the time. And I remember being on calls to him, and every time you would finish what you had to say, you would have to say over. I still have visions of some guy sitting in a room somewhere, switching
Yeah.
plugs over,
Yeah.
like, okay, over, and back to dad, and then he'd like, everything is great, how are you going, over, and then back to us again. And there certainly wasn't any FaceTime. I mean, the calls were, I don't remember again, but I'm sure they were far and few between.
Yeah.
They wouldn't
Yeah.
have been regular daily calls by any stretch.
But it's still
Because
tough
everyone
because like you're even though probably you don't remember some of the stuff, there's definitely things that people, I think, when they hear about families within the army and they hear that they've grown up in the army and stuff, like they say, "Oh, sure, you're used to it." But like now that you've married Messer from
yeah,
the army, but now that you've married Brian and he goes on tours and stuff, like it can never just get easy. It can never just be like, oh well,
no,
you're conditional to it. Like it must be always tough.
yeah, I don't think you could ever say to anybody that you could be used to something, that you could get used to being on your own for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever the deployment is. And yes, there's leave built in, there as well, and stuff like that, and they come home for a break. But no, I mean, ultimately, when dad was gone, mum was on her own, and now when Brian is gone, I'm on my own with the two girls. And you have family and friends and that will support you in and out. But at the end of the day, you're, full on, as anyone who's a parent knows, that it's the day in, day out. It's the breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Can be tedious when you're on your own and can be tough going. And I don't think that that's something you could ever get used to. That would be your, norm. I think that's always. But like that, I suppose, like Mum did, I do now. You kind of make the best of it, especially for the kids. You'd never speak negatively in front of them, or you'd always be protecting them from kind of when you get frustrated and run down and stuff like that. You just you keep going and you put on you the smiles, and you have your little bit of time out. You get your bit of support with your family and friends, and it's hard, but again, there's always, I always feel, once they're gone overseas, then that's great, because now the countdown clock is on.
Yes.
And we're ticking back to coming home.
Yeah, you've something to look forward to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And what do you do, like, so obviously when there's times that are tricky, what do you do to kind of handle or get through things? Do you literally just take a time out, or would it be a case of you just ring up a couple of people, have a chat with them, or people call over during the good times when we could through COVID and stuff? But
Absolutely, you could have people over, or you'd land on someone's door and have a cuppa, or the kids were actually in school. So you had a few hours, to yourself when they were going out for those few hours that you could decompress. But with them, I always find as much structure as is possible, without it being military. But you have your little routines and your dinners, and then the weekends can be long because obviously they're full days. So I always found we would have our fun day Sundays, and I would try at least every Sunday we would pack up and we would go up to Dublin, or we would go down the country and find a farmer's market or playground or somewhere different, and ring someone to meet us on the way, or go off, the three of us, and just have a bit of an adventure and making memories. That's really, like, what you're doing, and having a bit of fun with them and stuff like that, and getting away from the house and the
four walls, because I think it's so important to get out. And it's interesting that you talk about farmers markets in there, because like one of the things I mentioned there at the start, that you have that kind of, you're an entrepreneur and that you've set up a number of different businesses and had a cut at different things. And like one of the words that comes to mind when we were young ones was like, he's an ape, she's an ape. And then all of a sudden, then out of the last number of years, you created a product called Eat Like Apes, which is all healthy foods. And from that, then you've gone on to create Play Like Apes, which is all about teaching kids how to learn how to take part in yoga sessions and just kind of understand movement and all that. Where did that desire to, I suppose, be your own boss come from? And what was the eureka moment that you said, do you know what, I could do something here?
Well, I suppose, like all things, it was born out of circumstance. I had gone to college, studied, worked, went back to college, studied, worked, and was made redundant back in 2010. And in that year, that was a busy year, because I was was it May or June, April maybe, I was made redundant. July, we got married. And
what were you working at before that?
I was working in a primary school as a special needs assistant, and at that time there was massive cuts kind of across all departments, especially the government, in education and stuff like that. So I wasn't alone by any means. Lots of SNAs, special needs assistants, lost their jobs at that time. And so I suppose, again, we got pregnant quite quickly, and Lucy was born in the May. And when she was about 6 months, Brian went overseas. So I was torn. It was kind of a toss-up. What do I do? Do I push to try and get back out the door to work, to have her in a creche while I, go to work? And at the time, Mum and Dad lived overseas as well. So there was no local family. There was no one kind of nearby that if she was a little unwell or anything like that, I was going to be kind of, so yeah, so I felt torn. I was like, do I get a job? And then if, she goes into a creche, and I had worked for years in creches, so I know when children start in creches, they pick up everything, and I would have been trying to take time off work and managing it all while Brian was overseas. And we just said, look, we'll hold tough for another while, and let him do the 6 months tour. And then when he comes back, we'll look and see, will I start going back to work again? And another couple of months after that, Ellen arrived. So I was back to a newborn and a toddler, and they were a blur. When I think back now, gosh, it's a blur. Talk about the rinse, repeat, and recycle and go again. Yeah, so I, it was actually Lucy's first birthday, and I said, I really need to bake my child a birthday cake for her birthday. I should probably figure out how to do that. So I went researching, and I rang the mammies, and I discovered then a real passion for baking and cake decorating, and I really enjoyed that and did it for a time. And then we kind of looked at how we were eating at home, and kind of went, we need to maybe cut out some of the cake and the rubbish and things like that, and started looking at less processed foods. So that's where the apes kind of comes from. It's that kind of primal background, primal being, basic foods. So your nuts, seeds, veg, protein, and things like that. So we rejigged how we were looking, and then I thought, there's no good snacks for kids. I'm up in Super Value and different shops, and I'm looking around, and it's, I don't know how kids know, but they know the stuff with the most sugar in it. It must be the most neon wrappers that attracts them. And I thought, I could make little snacks for them. I was making them anyway at home. And then out of that, Eat Like Apes was born, really. So with Brian training, I was making protein balls and bites and stuff like that for him anyway.
Yeah.
And then I love granola, so I was making my own granolas, but I was making them grain free. So with just nuts, seeds, dried fruits, and things like that. And I just got really passionate about it, and with the encouragement, of course, of my family and stuff like that, I took it a step further and a step further, and eventually with the enterprise board, I got onto the Super Value Food Academy, and I got a massive support with that. So they really helped with, like anybody who works for themselves, you can only kind of know or be so good at so many things. So I might have been great at recipe development, but where did I buy a bag or get a label printed, or
Yeah.
or that. So that helped with all that side of it, and that launched and was very successful. Probably a little too successful for me on my own, so it got too big.
But it was great, because I remember seeing the products in stores and in Super Values and stuff around, and it's kind of, there's a nice bit of pride to it as well, because literally from grain to store, you were doing every single piece of mixing, molding, match and bake and whatever it was.
Merchandising, packaging, labeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like
It works.
going through the different stages of quality control and all that stuff. Like it was just it was incredible to see it take off so quickly. But then again, the fact that it took off so quickly meant that like your time wasn't your own then, like you were so focused.
It ate into everything, yeah. So it got to the stage like where, say, the girls are in preschool, so that's kind of, as anyone mammy knows, you've maybe about 2.5 hours to yourself. So I would split the days, and I would, produce and would like get things prepped, then produce the next day, then package them the next day, then label them, then try and get them, because you really only had that window. And then they were still small, so I could bring them to a point with me, but not, have them in the car for ages driving around.
Yeah.
But so time was, it was under pressure for time and stuff like that all the time. But it's amazing. It's a great motivator as well, what you can get done.
Yeah.
When you need to,
when you've got a deadline, right? And
absolutely.
what do you think is the biggest kind of learning that you would have taken out of that experience?
Just, well, I mean, I suppose I did it from nothing. in that kind of a way. So you can do absolutely anything. Set your mind to, really, is to give everything a shot. And the inner critic would have said, you've no business now going on to a food academy, like, but I applied anyway, and I put myself out there, and I thought, well, let's just give it a go. And at the start, you really like, because obviously your family and friends are saying, oh, they're lovely and they're great, they're so tasty and they're delicious and you should be selling them. And I know lots of people have family who say things, and then you go out into the wider public and it doesn't always ring true. But I had gotten it out into a couple of places. I did a bit of a farmer's market myself, or a local market, and then a coffee shop took a few bits off me, and they were ordering like consistently every week 20, 30 of the protein balls, kind of, and the different flavors. And I suppose that spoke for itself, really.
Yeah.
Then it was obvious that people, and they were getting the repeat business, people were coming back looking for them and stuff like that. So yeah, so you'll always have that kind of inner critic, imposter syndrome, kind of telling you can't or don't, or which,
Yeah, I think that's actually really
small.
interesting in that there's a hell of a lot of people who suffer from that, or not suffer from that, but have this would probably relate to that, in that
Yeah,
not thinking you're good enough, or nearly kind of putting yourself down, the self-talk being a bit negative, and not giving yourself the encouragement that you would potentially give to your best friend or to your buddy. Because if you reverse it, and I was listening to there's a podcast. I can't remember what it was, but essentially the message from it was like, don't say anything to yourself that you wouldn't say to your best friend.
yeah,
And
it's true.
if you can treat yourself like that in terms of your self-talk, because I'm a stickler for it as well. My self-talk can be quite negative sometimes, and
Oh
especially when
yeah,
I was playing rugby, or especially when I was competing for something, it would be kind of, you can't do this, you're not good enough, and that would drive you then to train or to do that little bit more. um but I remember when you were going for that, for those academies, and when I remember when you were putting yourself forward, and big thing I was always kind of suggesting or saying to you was like, listen, just go for it, because if you don't get it, at least you're in the exact same position now than you were before you applied.
this is it. Yeah. It's like that expression, win or learn. You can't lose when you're given something a lash, because even if they came back to me, I think what I found with lots of things is, well, sometimes people come back and it's just sometimes about timing.
Yeah.
Like, I was lucky I got onto that food academy that time. If I had gone the previous time or the time after, there might have been someone with a similar product that
Yeah.
might have been further along the line than I was, or had an already more established business, and then they would have been a better investment for them at that time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you can't beat yourself up. Yeah, sometimes it's just circumstance.
Sometimes you win, and you always learn. Whatever you do, at least try. Thank you for listening to part 1. If you'd like to listen to more of this story, click play on part 2. Stay up to date on all future episodes by hitting the subscribe option, or if you want to find out more, visit whatmakesyoutick.net.